starved, tortured, and abused, failed by everyone from the parents to even child services, not shown love or even some pity, not even remorse from the abusers who happened to be his own grandparents. That's what Jeffrey Baldwin went through at his tender age of 5 before his life was cut short. Jeffrey and his older sister had undergone one of the worst inhuman experiences a child would ever live through until Jeffrey couldn't anymore. On the evening of November 30th, 2002, a phone call was made by Jeffrey's grandmother to the emergency services. On rushing to the location, they were met with a disturbing scene of the emaciated, lifeless body of the young boy. His siblings, however, survived to tell the story of what really happened in their grandparents' house. This is the heartbreaking story of Jeffrey Baldwin. Born on January 20th, 1997, in Toronto, Canada, Jeffrey Baldwin was the son of Yvonne Kidman and Richard Baldwin and had 2 older sisters and a younger brother. He was a happy, healthy, and normal child and weighed an average weight for a baby his age. Life was normal as well, however. His parents were usually troubled, and with allegations of abuse and violence being leveled against them, and with them still being teenagers, they were deemed not fit to raise children, leading them to lose the custody of their 4 children by the summer of 1998. With the blessing, or rather the curse, of the Toronto Catholic Children's Aid Society, the children's care and well-being was handed over to the maternal grandparents, that is, Elva Bottineau and Norman Kidman, where life drastically changed, going from bad to the worst, especially for young Jeffrey and his older sister, who were for some unknown reason singled out as the bad kids. The oldest sister and the youngest brother were, however, considered the good kids and were treated normally, or if not, close to it. They were made to look down upon them and were warned by the grandparents not to talk about the other 2 to anyone, or even talk to them, or like them, and for that reason, they were terrified to do so. The oldest sister, understanding what was happening, still had pity and felt bad for them. A very energetic boy who loved Superman, who tried flying by jumping on and off chairs like every other kid his age did, was always joyful and loved being adventurous. One would never imagine that all that in one day was to be taken away from him. At that time, children were placed with immediate family members if the parents were not able to take care of them, so that the children could stay together and wouldn't have to be placed in group homes or under foster care. If a member of the children's extended family were able to take them, such as in this case the grandparents, it was seen as the most suitable solution. Elva, being a caregiver, was seen even better, as they believed that this was the right place for the children. Despite the 3-bedroomed household having 6 adults, that is the grandparents, their 2 daughters Yvette and Tammy and their boyfriends to squeeze in with 6 children, that is the 4 siblings, and their 2 cousins who were the children of Tammy, she would receive extra financial support for taking care of the children. What the child services didn't know, or didn't even try to find out, was that under the care of Norman and Elva, it was never a safe space, but rather a house full of agony. So what really happened behind the closed doors of this house, and what was the dark secrets that Norman and Elva had been covering for years? After Jeffrey's death and the shocking discovery of the state of his body and the conditions of the house, the children in the household were seized by the child services and sent to foster care, with the siblings ending up in a foster home under the care of an experienced foster mother. At first, cautious of their new surroundings, they were tight-lipped and couldn't even maintain eye contact for any length of time. But with time, and once they realized this was actually a safer place than where they were before, small bits of information came out from them revealing the traumatic events that they experienced. The foster mother recounted feeling both shocked and bewildered when they first asked if she had a pig wall and pig room in her house. The word pig apparently was a common phrase that was used to refer Jeffrey and his sister, who had gotten used to it. A photograph in which Jeffrey and his sister were sitting confined at a certain corner showed exactly what the children were describing as the pig wall. It's from there that if and when fed, they ate the leftovers of the meals that the rest of the people in the house had eaten, using a shared bowl which was called the pig bowl. This led to the malnourished state of their body, as they looked very small compared to children of their age, with their bodies having sores all over and developing distended bellies. On the second floor of the house was the bedroom in which Jeffrey and his sister spent every night and most of their days locked in, as if they were criminals. In here, there was no heat as the furnace vents were closed, and it was always dark, as the only window in the room was covered. They were usually not taken to hospital, and Jeffrey, unlike his sister and other siblings, didn't go to school as well. The reasoning behind this by the grandparents was that he was not well toilet trained. and therefore wouldn't be accepted. The sister was, however, threatened not to talk about Jeffrey and what they underwent at school, as the grandparents knew that the children's aid would come and seize all the children from them once they found out. They were not allowed to play outside like the other children. They had bright red skin on their legs, which was caused by urine washing down to their feet, as they did not use the bathroom most of the time. The room had an awful stench that could even stick on your clothes when you came out of it, as described by one of the detectives. This was often due to their waste being all over the place, and on squeezing the mattresses that they slept on, urine would come out of them. Elva forced them to help clean up their mess by making them scrub the walls and clean their beds, and if they didn't do it well, they were hit by the mop and told, and I quote, "Hurry up, you pigs!" Norman would hit them with his hand, a slipper, or a newspaper if they misbehaved. The oldest sister described the lickings she witnessed her younger siblings going through where their grandfather spanked them with a metal spoon. They were lined up and had to remove their clothing and underpants, and when she asked him why they had to do that, she was answered so that they wouldn't bleed on the clothes. They were sometimes let out of the room for what was described as exercise, where they were basically forced to walk around the kitchen, and if they stopped, they were thrown objects at and called names, the likes of pig and other abusive terms. And if you thought that this by far was the most evil level they could reach, well, it gets worse from here. The two children were not only deprived of good food, but also water, which reverted them to animal instinct, as on one occasion after their arrival to the new foster home, the girl was found drinking water from the toilet, an occurrence that horrified the foster mother. And when she asked her why she drank from the toilet, she simply answered that that was where she and her brother used to drink water from in the previous house. She explained further that they had to wash themselves and their underwear using the toilet water, and that it was the idea of their grandmother. Another occurrence was when the girl was eating very quickly at the dining table as she had an insatiable appetite. The foster mother heard the youngest one saying that if she puked it, she had to eat it, because at their grandmother's house that's what they did. At school, some of her teachers thought that something was amiss, as she would often smell like urine, and during snack times, her insatiable appetite was in display. The teachers, having concerns about the young girl, however, chose not to report anything about the matter. And with the children also afraid to share what they went through, this meant that no one could rescue them. Around the year 2000, one of the workers from the Catholic Children's Aid Society made a short visit to Elva and Norman's household, which had been the first visit in a long time. During the visit, the worker had noticed that there had been a bruise under Jeffrey's eye. Had the worker done their due diligence, the children could have been immediately taken, and young Jeffrey would probably still be alive to this day. The injury had, however, been quickly dismissed as a small accident, and no action was taken to further investigate Jeffrey and his siblings' home life with their grandparents. The oldest sister further revealed that the only time she ever recalled seeing Jeffrey smile was when their parents visited them, a thing that didn't really happen often as one would think. Unlike Yvonne's two sisters and their boyfriends who lived in that house and did nothing to help the children but rather watch them suffer and Jeffrey dying slowly, Richard and Yvonne didn't live there and had limited access to their own kids, which was controlled by the highly manipulative grandmother. A long manipulative plan to take over the care of the children had for years been in play. The moment problems had started arising, the child services were involved, as Yvonne and Richard had left one of their children unattended. The child was supposed to stay with the grandparents for only a couple of months as the parents fixed their issues. Long before they knew it, they had already filed for custody 2 months in, and with the help of the Catholic Children's Aid Society, they got it. Elva was secretly recording their phone calls and taking notes of them, all in an effort to prove that they were unfit, eventually getting what she wanted, the children's custody. Question is, though, didn't they notice Jeffrey's physical state during their visits? Well, apparently they did. And on questioning Elva why Jeffrey was smaller, even to the point his younger brother was outgrowing him, and why he hadn't been potty trained yet, she always had an answer for everything, or as I would say, a manipulative excuse for this. She claimed that everyone always thought that Jeffrey would grow up to be short, since there were a lot of short people in the family. She further argued that it was the steroids in the cream that his younger brother used for his eczema condition, which made him grow faster than Jeffrey. Only thing left to do, according to them, was to just trust her word, even after they were banned from entering their room, and also after discovering that it was mostly locked. Oddly enough, they were told by Elva herself that the children were drinking from the toilet, and on asked if this did not make them concerned, this is what they had to say.
Didn't that cause you to be a little bit concerned?
We voice concerns, but then all we get is arguments, and basically, if you don't like the way things look, leave.
The same ultimatum was also given to everyone else in the house who tried to voice their concerns. James Mills, Yvette's boyfriend who lived with them, gave his statement saying he always thought the treatment of Jeffrey and his sister was deplorable as they were treated and lived like dogs, while the other children in the household were treated completely different, even the ones that Elva babysat from outside. He had told her on a number of times to get help for Jeffrey as he tried to protest for him due to Jeffrey's skinny frame that kept on getting worse. However, she declined, insisting that it would ruin her check as those kids were $600 to her every month. In short, all she cared about was the extra money that she received that was intended to help her raise them in a good environment and the best way possible. But instead, it was the other way round. With him not paying the rent of the house, he knew if he further insisted on the matter, he would be kicked out. Trying to talk to his girlfriend so that she could try talking to her parents was in vain, as she too was afraid of raising the issue, and would even spark an argument as she asked him in a rather peculiar way, "What do you want me to do?" James and Jeffrey's oldest sister had shared their memories of the days before Jeffrey passed away. The sister described how the day before he died, that Elva wrapped him in a blanket and set him in front of the TV, but he wasn't able to keep his head up as it kept falling down. Elva, however, brushed it off, assuming he was just being lazy, not knowing what was really happening. James had been watching him the nights before as he crawled up the stairs, too weak to even walk on his own, his little pajamas falling off because he had no hips. He knew that his condition was really bad, and Jeffrey's life was in deep trouble. As he was playing video games in the next room, he heard coughing and sobbing coming from the locked room where Jeffrey spent his last moments in. Afraid to risk his free stay at the house, he did nothing. And on the evening of November 30th, 2002, Jeffrey succumbed to his poor health conditions, with the cause of death being as a result of septic shock and bacterial pneumonia. However, it was also evident that he had suffered due to prolonged starvation and abuse. The grandmother, as mentioned earlier on in the video, called the medical services, saying that her grandson was not breathing. When the ambulance arrived, the paramedics instantly became aware that Jeffrey had been abused. A report was made by a pathologist, Dr. Gregory Wilson, where he stated that his body was covered in bruises, sores and abrasions, and he was starved for a long period of time, that he only weighed 21 pounds or around 9.5 kilograms, which was even less than his weight at his first birthday. Jeffrey had no muscle tone or body fat, and his clothes were always falling off of him because he was so skeletal. Additionally, he had ulcers on his genitals, and a few days before his death, a fecal bacteria had gotten into his bloodstream, causing septic shock that would have made it difficult for him to breathe. Jeffrey had most likely placed his fingers into his mouth, transferring the bacteria into his lungs. A pediatric nutritionist, Dr. Stanley Zlotkin, examined Jeffrey's case and stated that in all his years of research in third world countries at the time, he had never seen a child that was starved and stunted to such an extent. With immediate effect, the children in the household were all seized and placed under foster care by the Catholic Children's Aid Society, where the siblings ended up under the care of the foster mother, as stated earlier. Toronto police were immediately on the case, of course, but it was complicated by the fact that the Catholic Children's Aid Society were involved in the family's collective life, Jeffrey's 3 siblings and 2 young cousins being seized and placed in foster care, and some changes in the homicide squad. It must have seemed to Elva and Norman that nothing much was happening, as they had not yet been arrested and thought they had got away with the murder, and so they got themselves busy. The room where Jeffrey and his sister used to be locked up in was cleaned up and painted. With the new look, no one would have guessed what heinous atrocities took place in there, where the 2 urine and feces-stained mattresses that when pressed fluid would gush out had once served as beds of continuous pain and suffering for Jeffrey and his sister. There were now proper beds with pillows and warm blankets. They, apparently with their high degree of audacity, had done the makeover ready to welcome back the 3 siblings home. Around the same time as well, Bottineau was back in family court trying to get back Jeffrey's siblings out of foster care and back in her home. However, she and her husband were arrested later that month on March 19, 2003, and charged with second-degree murder and forcible confinement, with the former's charge in relation to Jeffrey's death and the latter's for the locking up of his sister. During their interviews with the investigators, they didn't say anything at all, as they showed no emotion and no remorse when they were shown photos of Jeffrey. On further investigations, revelations of their seemingly dark past records were uncovered. a deed that, if it had been carried out by the Catholic Children's Aid Society, would have ruled them out of being given the responsibility of raising, let alone the Baldwin siblings, but any child at all. A background check on them would have shown them that Elva had a child abuse conviction back in 1970, with her own daughter Eva being the victim. The 5-month-old baby had died of pneumonia in 1969, and on further investigation of Eva's death, it was discovered that she had multiple fractures on her body. It had even made it to the local newspaper as a major story that shocked many at the time, with Elva being sentenced to 1 year of probation. In 1978, Norman was convicted of assaulting 2 of Elva's children from a previous relationship and was given a sentence of 2 years of probation. The 2 children had undergone the same cruel treatment that Jeffrey and his sister experienced before being seized by the same child services that helped the 2 to get custody of the 4 children 2 decades later. One of the children, Fred, shared his experience.
As a child, I can remember being, stuffed into a dog cage. Me and my sister being put into a metal dog bin.
He and his sister were shown nothing but abuse in that house. They, similarly to Jeffrey and his sister, reverted to animal instinct.
It sounds gross, but I have to say it, but when they go to flush the toilet, there's clean water. Well, we assumed was clean water. The toilet was never, all that clean, to be honest. But you take out what you could with your hand and drink it out of your hand.
Same thing and similar experiences, only 2 decades apart. The same child services agency was also involved and ever present in that apartment. The caseworker for the agency knew they were being beaten and would argue with Elva to get her act together and take care of them, but it ended there, as there was no evidence that the Children's Aid took any action. And according to Fred, the visits made by the caseworker were another excuse for Elva and Norman's thrashings.
And the minute she was gone, the door would unlock and we get beaten because she'd end up showing up because of us screaming or carrying on.
What led to them being saved was when Fred's sister showed up to school with bruises forcing the Child's Aid to act as the children were taken and put up for adoption. As mentioned earlier, Norman was arrested and given the 2-year probation after being fined only $300 when he pleaded guilty. However, he still stayed with the family, which at this point had grown to include their 3 daughters, with the Child's Aid always monitoring. By the 80s, Elva Bottineau had already been through 2 psychological evaluations, and both of them stated that Elva should not be in care of children, and therefore she shouldn't have been deemed fit to even take care of her daughters. Surprisingly, she was now even sponsored by the Child's Aid as a daycare giver, as they paid her to even take care of other people's children. This would also lead to them being helped to get custody of the Baldwin siblings, as mentioned earlier. The investigators weren't the only ones surprised with how careless the Child's Aid was in helping them get the custody. Elva's son, Fred, had some years before Jeffrey's death re-established contact with her, trying to find answers as to why she treated them with such cruelty, only to discover that despite having been allowed to raise 3 more children, she now even had her grandchildren living with her.
She told me she had custody of all 4 kids. I'm like, how did you get custody of all 4 kids?
And you were surprised because
because of the fact that she actually got adoption of those kids. After all me and my sister went through, and this lady is still able to keep 3 kids, plus take on the adoption of the other 4 kids. I'm sorry, I don't have the highest grade in high school or the highest education, but it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out. It's like there's something wrong.
That was also the time he saw the state of Jeffrey as well.
His ribs would be all sunken, his arms were really thin and skinny. That triggered an alarm in me. I was like that.
you remember looking like that.
Oh, of course.
So when you saw Jeffrey and you had concerns, did you think maybe I should go to the authorities? Maybe I should go to Children's Aid? Maybe I should warn them about this woman if they don't know?
I thought of it, but at the same point, it was the thing that kept coming back to me was that, look, she's got Children's Aid knows that they're here. Normally they do their checkups and whatever occasionally, I don't know why they wouldn't have seen something like that happening. Maybe I should have said something or done something, but I didn't.
The court declared they had kept Jeffrey and his sister locked in a bedroom where he lived in his own feces and left them to drink from a toilet. The judge was told that the pair used the children as a source of income, collecting government support checks while offering little or none in return. 3 years later, on April 7, 2006, they were convicted of second-degree murder by Justice David Watt in the Ontario Superior Court of Justice, with the sentencing being delivered on June 9, 2006. Elva Bottineau was sentenced to 22 years in prison, that is until 2028, and Norman Kidman 20 years, that is until 2026, before they respectively become eligible for parole. The Catholic Children's Aid Society claimed to have no previous knowledge of the grandparents' child abuse conviction from the 70s, and they stated that they only learned of this fact in 2002, after Jeffrey had died. There had been, however, a record of the abuse conviction in the Children's Aid Society's own files. For whatever reason, the agency had claimed to have no knowledge about Elva and Norman's child abuse records at the time of the children's placement with them. Perhaps they knew, but they just didn't care, or wouldn't admit for obvious reasons. At the time, the Ministry of Children and Youth Services didn't have a requirement to look into child welfare records when it came to putting children with their extended family. Ontario believed that family preservation meant everything, even if it was detrimental to the child to be placed with certain relatives, as was the case with Jeffrey and his siblings. Michael Davis, a detective investigating the case, told the coroner's counsel that he would have charged every single adult that lived in that home for their negligence. However, the Provincial Child and Family Services Act, while imposing on all citizens the duty to report if they suspect a child is suffering, they couldn't be punished as only professionals such as doctors, nurses, teachers and social workers that may be involved with children can be charged under the Act, and only they are subject to a fine not exceeding $1,000 at the time. As for criminal charges, he said, only those with the duty of care, meaning Bottineau and Kidman, could be charged. The detective, however, wasn't the only witness who thought the witless adults who lived in that house and watched the destruction of that child without lifting a finger to help were responsible in his death. Osiris Villalobos, the after-hours child aids worker who visited the home with the police after leaving the hospital, wept on the witness stand as he remembered the stench of Jeffrey's sad room and how the smell of urine was so strong that it stayed on his clothes. The room, he said, was totally different from the other bedrooms in the small house, where the adults and the favored children lived completely different. He would have also charged them if it were up to him, he added, while wiping his tears. Osiris wasn't involved in the case file and the agency's failure to check the records of Elva and Norman. Jeffrey's paternal grandmother Susan Dimitriadis testified as she stated that all her desperate attempts to see her grandson were ignored by the child's aid, and that if she had gotten the chance, she would have taken him without even caring about the police coming after her. Elva and Norman had made appeals, but in March 3, 2011, the Court of Appeal for Ontario dismissed both of them. Bottineau's lawyer had argued that she wasn't smart enough to realize Jeffrey would die, and Kidman, for some unknown reason, had asked the court to quash his murder conviction and instead sent him to prison for manslaughter. In January 19, 2012, the Supreme Court of Canada decided not to hear any other appeal from Elva. In September 9, 2013, a coroner's inquest into Jeffrey's death was started. The main goal of the inquest was not to place blame on those involved, but to explore the systemic issues that had taken place in relation to Jeffrey's death. The reason why the inquest took place more than a decade after Jeffrey had died was because Elva Bottineau had exhausted all of her appeals the previous year. There have been a great deal of changes in the child welfare system since Jeffrey Baldwin's death, in which the Catholic Children's Aid Society stated that Elva and Norman's horrific child abuse convictions would not go unnoticed if he was to be placed in that home after these changes took place. In February 14, 2014, the coroner's jury ruled the boy's death a homicide and delivered 103 recommendations. The Ontario Association of Children's Aid Societies and the Children's Aid Societies both conducted reviews of the recommendations that were directed towards all the Ontario's Children's Aid Societies. These recommendations required the Child Services to do a thorough background check of criminal records and identify the caregiver's identity. The new changes to the child welfare system meant that relatives who became caregivers would be subjected to the same standards as adoptive and foster parents. They would need to go through family history, background, and record checks to ensure that they could provide adequate care in a decent environment and, most importantly, a good home. Despite the fact that he lived a short life, he will still be remembered for his boisterous energy, beautiful smile, and being a lovely boy. A bronze statue of him, dressed as his favorite superhero Superman, was put in Greenwood Park in Toronto to honor his memory, and as a symbol to everyone to show how important it is to be diligent and shed light to child abuse, with a strong reminder that children should get better treatment and, most importantly, to be shown love, the love that unfortunately Jeffrey Baldwin and his sister were not given. On the Sunday afternoon of January 1st, 2006, a man and his daughter arrived at his friend's family house for a New Year's get-together party. He finds the door open, which was a usual thing the hosts did during their parties. Upon entering, he encountered a thick cloud of smoke, prompting him to alert others, and they contacted the authorities. Firefighters swiftly arrived, extinguished the fire, but tragically discovered the lifeless bodies of the party hosts, the Harvey family. What initially seemed like a fire-related incident turned into a chilling revelation. The Harveys had not succumbed to the flames, but rather fell victim to something far more sinister, and it was now a murder investigation. This left the investigators not only emotionally shaken, but also bewildered at the grim turn of events. What really happened here, and who had murdered them? This is the heartbreaking case of the Harvey family. "49-year-old Brian Tabor Harvey, a local icon, gained recognition in the 1980s as the singer-songwriter for the underground indie band House of Freaks. Despite parting ways professionally with his musical partner Johnny Hott in the 90s, they remained close friends. Brian, a devoted musician, took the stage for the last time at a New Year's Eve show that was sadly and unbeknownst to him the final night of his life. On the other hand, 39-year-old Catherine Elizabeth Grabinski achieved success as the co-owner of the popular toy store World of Mirth, located in Richmond's Carytown district. A community pillar, she was an artist involved in various endeavors, from painting sets for community theatre to working as a pastry chef and waitress. Catherine had an older sister, Shelley Grabinski, and was also the half-sister of actor Stephen Culp, known for his roles in The West Wing and Desperate Housewives, among other films. The paths of Brian and Catherine would eventually cross at the Border Cafe on Main Street, where Catherine worked, and Brian frequently visited with Johnny. In 1990, they tied the knot, and the House of Freaks released an album featuring a song dedicated to Catherine titled "I Got Happy." The couple welcomed 2 daughters into their lives. Stella Ann, their first daughter, was born in 1996. Reflecting on fatherhood, Brian expressed on a fan website, "I think I've come pretty close to knowing why I'm here on Earth since my daughter was born. I think you have to be hopeful about life when you have a child. You owe it to them." Their second daughter, Ruby May, was born in 2001. While Brian continued his musical pursuits, he also took on a job working on computers for the Henrico County school system. Kathy, on the other hand, embarked on the entrepreneurial path by opening World of Mirth, a unique toy and gift store that became a cornerstone in the fashionable Carytown neighborhood. Her brother, Stephen Culp, explained in court, "She wanted to create a space where parents could come with their kids and spend time, and kids could play with the toys. There's no guns or swords or anything like that there. It's a wonderful place." The Harveys established their home in a stately old neighborhood on the south side of Richmond that had large trees, porch swings, and ivy-covered surroundings. They had a family room in the basement of their 2-story red brick house. The beautiful family were well known and beloved in the community of Richmond, and no one really had bad intentions towards them, or so everyone thought. On New Year's Day, Sunday 2006, Brian, his wife Catherine, and their 2 daughters, 9-year-old Stella and 4-year-old Ruby, anticipated a bustling day ahead. Their plans included hosting a lunchtime barbecue for friends and family, prompting them to rise early and make preparations for the upcoming festivities. It had become a tradition for them to throw a party every New Year's Day, gathering their extensive circle of friends for the occasion. On that particular Sunday morning, Brian ventured outside their residence in the fashionable Woodland Heights area of Richmond, Virginia, to retrieve the newspaper. Absorbed in the front-page news, he returned indoors without locking the door. But since they lived in a relatively safe neighborhood, this wouldn't normally have been a cause for concern. Typically, they also didn't secure the door on party days, leaving it open for arriving friends. However, on this fateful day, unbeknownst to Brian, opportunistic criminals were clandestinely lurking nearby. Catherine busily prepared cookies in the kitchen for the anticipated guests who were due to arrive shortly. Suddenly, she heard voices emanating from the living room assuming someone had arrived earlier than expected. To her dismay, upon approaching, she was confronted not by familiar faces, but by two unknown men. In the tense moments that ensued, Brian, Catherine, and young Ruby were directed downstairs to the basement playroom. Stella, who had spent the previous night at a slumber party, had yet to join them. Once the family was confined to the small space, the intruders used electrical cords and packing tape to bind them, assuring that cooperation would prevent any harm towards them. As they proceeded to ransack the house, a knock on the front door interrupted them, occurring around 10 a.m. The apparent leader of the group released Catherine from her restraints and instructed her to deal with whoever was at the door. However, before permitting her to leave, he issued a stern warning. If she sought help or attempted to escape, her daughter and husband would be murdered. As Stella's arrival was imminent, a distressed Catherine found herself caught in a difficult dilemma. Answering the door would expose her daughter to the same peril as the rest of the family, while ignoring the persistent knocking could incur the wrath of the assailants who clearly held the upper hand. Ultimately, she concluded that cooperation was the most prudent choice, and with that decision, she opened the door. In an unexpected turn of events, Stella swiftly darted past Catherine and made her way directly to the playroom, where the family usually spent a lot of time together. Acting quickly, Catherine intercepted her daughter's friend, preventing her from following. Kirsten Perkinson, the friend's mother, later recounted her surprise at Catherine's unusual behavior, which deviated from her typical exuberance. In response to Perkinson's inquiry about her well-being, Catherine, normally lively, claimed to be unwell. She gestured with a circular motion to the side of her head, mimicking a gun to indicate someone might be considered crazy, abruptly ending the conversation and shutting the door. This peculiar gesture would later trouble Perkinson, who wondered if Catherine was attempting to convey something. Was Kathy being monitored by the intruders? Could she have attempted an escape, potentially saving herself and Stella? However, the dilemma of leaving Brian and Ruby behind weighed heavily on Catherine's mind. Perkinson departed, planning to return later for the party. With all four Harveys now inside the house, Catherine returned to the basement and discovered a terrified Stella, who had been securely tied up alongside the rest of the family. As everyone lay bound and vulnerable, chaos erupted. Suddenly and without warning, the man in charge revealed a knife sourced from the Harveys' own kitchen and began slashing their throats, including those of the young girls. Expressing frustration that they were not succumbing quickly enough, he instructed his accomplice to bludgeon their heads. However, the partner refused, prompting the assailant to grab a claw hammer and ruthlessly strike them repeatedly until they stopped moving. After removing Catherine Harvey's wedding ring, the assailants ignited the room, using wine as an accelerant to conceal evidence of their heinous acts. As they made their escape from the residence, they indulged in a plate of freshly baked cookies that sat cooling on the kitchen counter and stole a laptop, DVD player, and various other items. Rushing out, they entered the getaway vehicle parked outside. Inside the getaway vehicle was a woman who was in a relationship with one of the men, serving as a lookout during what was initially intended as a simple robbery. They swiftly departed, leaving the scene just as inconspicuously as they had arrived. Sometime later, at around 1:30 p.m., Johnny Hott arrived for the celebratory gathering. Upon opening the front door, he was greeted by a thick cloud of smoke pouring out. Alarmed by the pungent odor of burning, he alerted the neighbors, who quickly dialed 911. As emergency responders entered the premises and dealt with the fire, unfortunately they encountered 4 bodies in the smoldering basement, still intact. Investigators at the scene soon deduced that the fire did not result in their demise, but rather a more sinister cause of death was unveiled, and this had now become a murder investigation. Police officers and paramedics, who were accustomed to witnessing the darkest aspects of humanity, were reported to have found the harrowing scene so distressing that some openly shed tears. The revelation that the parents had been compelled to witness the brutal demise of their children, and vice versa, was sad to imagine. Autopsies disclosed that Brian and Catherine met their end due to blunt force trauma to the head. Stella, tragically, succumbed to a combination of blunt force trauma and smoke inhalation, suggesting she was alive when the fire ignited, despite her grievous injuries. Ruby's demise resulted from stab wounds to her neck and back. Despite initiating an immediate investigation into the murders, the authorities had little evidence. Recognizing the potential for criminals to divulge information, they appealed to the public for assistance. And fortunately, their breakthrough came a few days later. On January 6th, a woman named Latoya Pawley contacted the police, urging them to conduct a welfare check on her friend, 21-year-old Ashley Baskerville Tucker. Pawley expressed her concerns as she believed that Ashley's boyfriend, 29-year-old Ray Joseph Dandridge, and his uncle, 29-year-old Ricky Javen Gray, were involved in the Harvey family's murder. Ricky, who was slightly younger than his nephew by a few months, was said to be the one in charge. The shocking revelation continued as Pawley disclosed that the two men had stashed evidence of their crimes at her residence. She revealed that Gray and Dandridge had recently visited her home with a laptop that had an image of the Harveys as its wallpaper. The Harvey case had by then received extensive coverage in the news, leaving no doubt that the laptop belonged to them. Additionally, Latoya provided intricate details about a scheme devised by Ashley, Gray, and Dandridge to rob Ashley's parents. In this plan, Ashley was supposed to act as a hostage, allowing Ricky and Gray to extort money from the Baskerville Tuckers, which would portray Ashley as innocent. Despite being privy to the entire plan and being offered a role, Latoya declined, becoming suspicious of the trio. The uncle and nephew were the only ones that returned hours later, and when asked about Ashley's whereabouts, they cryptically replied, "Ashley has gone bye-bye." This statement heightened Latoya's concerns, prompting her to contact the police. It was this crucial information that investigators needed to start connecting the dots. Having confirmed Latoya's information, investigators proceeded to the residence where Ashley resided with her mother, 46-year-old Mary Baskerville Tucker, and stepfather, 55-year-old Percival Tucker. To their horror, they encountered yet another gruesome scene. Upon entering the home, they discovered the lifeless bodies of all three victims, subjected to a brutal method similar to the Harvey family's fate. The victims were bound, gagged, and had their throats mercilessly slit. Duct tape wound tightly around their heads inflicted additional suffering on Mary and Percival, who both displayed deep neck lacerations. Percival had a sock forcibly inserted into his throat. Ashley, tragically, was found to have been suffocated with a plastic bag. The common cause of death for all three was determined to be suffocation and torture. Suspecting the presence of thrill killers, law enforcement agencies from across the region collaborated in a joint effort to apprehend them before they could perpetrate further atrocities. Similar to the Harveys, Percival and Mary led quiet lives without harboring any enemies. Percival worked as a forklift operator, while Mary was employed by a housekeeping business. Their tranquil existence was shattered by the betrayal from their own daughter, ultimately leading to the tragic demise of an innocent couple who sought to enjoy their golden years. The investigators swiftly uncovered the crucial link between the Harveys and Tuckers. Ashley was found wearing Brian Harvey's wedding band, the same one that was missing and taken from Catherine. With this revelation, urgent action was imperative to apprehend Gray and Dandridge before they could inflict further irreparable harm. Having traced their movements back to their home state of Pennsylvania, Gray and Dandridge were captured in Philadelphia on January 7th. In his questioning, Dandridge asserted that the murders had been conceived by his uncle, and he had merely followed instructions. Faced with these incriminating accusations, Gray readily admitted to the killings of the Harveys and his involvement in those of Ashley and her parents. While these straightforward confessions were enough to leave anyone astounded, it became apparent that this was just the beginning. Gray provided gruesome, intricate details of both family massacres, emphasizing that their actions were driven solely by the need for money. During the Harvey family murders, unbeknownst to everyone, he was under the influence of PCP. PCP, or phenylcyclohexylpiperidine, is a drug known for inducing auditory and visual hallucinations, as well as violent behavior. Throughout his confession, Gray maintained a chilling, emotionless stare. His utter indifference towards the lives he took led investigators to believe they were face-to-face with the devil incarnate. It was also revealed that Gray was responsible for the murder of his wife, Trevor Terrell Gray, whose body was uncovered in a shallow grave on Brookside Avenue in Washington, Pennsylvania. The couple had been married for 6 months prior to her tragic murder and resided together in a house owned by Trevor's family, along with Gray's nephew, Ray. According to Trevor's parents, the Grays frequently engaged in bitter arguments. Claw marks on Ricky's forearm were even discovered on the day Trevor's body was found. Despite being interviewed by Washington police, neither Gray nor Dandridge were initially considered suspects. Marna Squires, Trevor's mother, alleged that law enforcement assumed Trevor had succumbed to a drug overdose, leading to a lackadaisical investigation into her death. Although Trevor's demise was deemed suspicious at the time, a homicide investigation was only initiated after Gray's confession in 2006. On December 31, 2005, a brutal assault unfolded, where 26-year-old Ryan Carey was attacked by two men in front of his parents' Arlington home, who were later identified as Gray and Dandridge. The assault left Carey with severe beating and stab wounds to the chest, neck, and arms, resulting in a near-fatal assault that caused him to spend the following 2 weeks in a coma. Additionally, he permanently lost the use of his right arm. On February 9, 2006, Ricky Gray faced 5 charges of capital murder, while Ray Dandridge was indicted on 3 counts of murder for his involvement in the Baskerville Tucker killings. Despite their earlier admissions, both men pleaded not guilty. After a 6-month trial, the jury found Gray guilty on all counts, leading to a life sentence for the murders of Brian and Catherine Harvey. In response to the brutal taking of Stella and Ruby's lives, the court deemed nothing less than a death sentence appropriate. In September 2006, following his uncle's conviction, and after learning the verdict in his case, Dandridge opted for a plea deal to evade the death penalty. He received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. In December 2006, Ricky Gray faced charges from Culpeper County for the murder of Cheryl Warner, a 37-year-old legal secretary and mother of 3. Warner was discovered shot and hanged by an electrical cord in the basement of her Burning Reaver residence. Gray entered a not guilty plea. However, on June 4, 2008, the charge was suspended due to conflicting evidence. Over the subsequent 9 years, Gray's legal team pursued numerous appeals, primarily arguing that their client suffered from diminished capacity due to an abusive childhood. The case reached the Supreme Court, where it was summarily rejected in 2016. In November 2016, Gray was scheduled to be executed on January 18, 2017. On January 18, 2017, with all of his appeals exhausted, Ricky Gray was executed by lethal injection at Greensville Correctional Center. Ray Dandridge still remains incarcerated at Sussex II State Prison. The brutal murders of the Harvey family unleashed an overwhelming wave of horror and sorrow, with over 1,400 individuals attending their memorial service, expressing their condolences and grief. In front of Kathy's store, flowers and dolls piled up and formed a poignant tribute. Along the curb outside the red brick house, children placed candles which maintained their glow for weeks. A neighbor reflected on the community's collective mourning, stating, "We kept those candles lit for weeks." Kathy's brother, Culp, testified about the profound impact of the murders, describing them as a lightning bolt to the heart that felt bottomless. He further expressed, "It kills me to think about their last hours. We are all trying to get past this. You know, we owe it to them and to their spirit." Within Richmond's Forest Hill Park, an entrance to a footbridge is adorned with a granite monument, a poignant dedication to the Harvey family. This family, who had previously enjoyed many joyful moments at the site, saw their lives abruptly and tragically cut short. A bronze plaque, depicting their radiant smiles, serves as a commemoration of happier days before the unfathomable evil infiltrated their lives, devastating everything in its wake. It is sad and unfortunate what all the victims faced against these monsters. As we reflect on this heart-wrenching tale, our thoughts are with the victims whose lives were tragically cut short and the loved ones they left behind. In the heart of Columbia, South Carolina, amidst the energy of a bustling college town, the life of a young student named Samantha Lee Josephson took a dark and tragic turn. Her story is one that gripped a nation and shed light on the potential dangers that lurk in the most routine aspects of our lives. Samantha, a vivacious and ambitious young woman, was a beacon of light on the University of South Carolina campus. Little did anyone suspect that a routine night out would lead to a series of events that would shatter the lives of those who knew her. Samantha Lee Josephson was born to her parents Seymour and Marcy Josephson in Princeton, New Jersey, and grew up in Robbinsville, New Jersey as a child. She attended the University of South Carolina, where she majored in political science. Samantha, who was a senior in college at the time of her demise, planned on graduating in 2019 and attending Drexel University School of Law, where she wanted to study to become a lawyer specializing in international law. Samantha earned a full scholarship to Drexel University as well as a partial scholarship to Rutgers, and aspired to practice international law. Samantha was a member of the Alpha Gamma Delta sorority, studied abroad in Barcelona, and visited Madrid and Paris during her time in South Carolina. Samantha was amazingly beautiful and had a wonderful smile. Samantha had a boyfriend named Greg, and the couple was very close to each other. They kept in touch with each other every day, constantly texting and calling each other whenever it was possible. They had plans to start a future together. Even when Samantha was going to be attending law school, Greg was going to move in with her and support her. Everything seemed going well till Friday, March 29, 2019, when she never returned to her apartment, and things took a turn for the worse for Samantha. On the evening of March 28, 2019, Samantha planned to go out with her roommate and some friends in Columbia, South Carolina. Her boyfriend Greg was supposed to join them also, but he was back in his hometown at the time. Still, he told her to go out and have fun without him. Samantha was feeling gloomy after hearing of a family member's ailment. What she just needed was to distract herself a bit, and going out with some friends was the perfect opportunity to raise her spirits. The group met up and went to a few different bars before finally settling at a bar known as the Bird Dog Bar, which was located in an area known as 5 Points, a hotspot for students to hang out at bars. Even though Samantha was having a fun time out with her friends, she continuously texted her boyfriend Greg, beseeching him to make a 2-hour drive to visit her in Columbia because she needed emotional support. The couple had already made plans to see each other the following weekend, so her boyfriend never changed his mind and decided to stay where he was at, but still, he kept in constant communication with her. At around 2 a.m., Samantha decided to head back to her apartment by herself, and she called an Uber, a popular rideshare service, using an app on her phone. As that was a common practice among her and her peers on that occasion, fate would deliver her into the hands of a murderer. While Samantha was waiting for the Uber, she had one last chat on the phone with Greg at around 2:04 a.m. Samantha told him she was headed home and took an Uber on the way. That was the routine Samantha had done many times before, using an Uber to get to and from the bars because it was way too far for a walk. A few minutes after placing the request with an Uber, a car pulled up to the curb where Samantha and a group of other weary bar customers were waiting for lifts. Security cameras captured her approaching the car, only to realize that the driver was there for someone else. After doing an about-face, she is seen retreating to her spot on the sidewalk. Samantha was wearing an orange shirt and black pants. After some time, a black Chevrolet Impala driven by a man who was later identified as Nathaniel David Rowland pulled up into the space in front of her. Samantha said goodbye to Greg, and assuming that was her lift, she opened the door and exchanged a quick word with the person behind the wheel before climbing into the back seat. Once she was inside, the car sped off away. Within a matter of moments, the Uber that Samantha ordered arrived at the designated pickup location. After searching in vain for their customer, the driver canceled the request and left. From that point in time, nobody other than the 21-year-old political science major student and the man driving the Impala knew that she had gotten into the wrong car. The CCTV footage would later show that the black Chevrolet Impala circled the area numerous times before targeting Samantha. Anybody who has ever spent time in 5 Points was aware that college kids gathered in the streets after the bars closed to wait for their rides, and watching him drive around the area gave rise to the conclusion that he knew exactly what he was doing that night. Amazing boyfriend Greg he tracked Samantha via the Find My Friends app on her phone to make sure that she got home safe that night. While he watched Samantha's movement on the map via the app, he realized that she was traveling in the opposite direction of where her apartment was located, although at first didn't think much of it, as it could be she was going to a friend's house. Greg later texted her to check to see if she was okay. Unfortunately, he never got any feedback. He then tried calling her, but she never answered her phone. Greg never gave up and tried texting her several more times until he noticed that messages he sent her showed up as delivered but not read, meaning Samantha never read any of Greg's text messages. Her phone location later on stopped sharing, which made Greg shocked, as it had never happened before. Greg later thought that Samantha misplaced her phone in the Uber, but still, he decided to call her friends and her roommate to find out if they heard from her or if she had made it to her home. Unfortunately, nobody heard from her or saw her. Greg hoped she would turn up in the morning and so tried to get some sleep. The following day in the morning, Samantha was nowhere to be found. Her roommates were concerned about her whereabouts and reported her missing. Her boyfriend, Greg, also made a 2-hour drive down to Columbia to assist in searching for her. A little over 3 to 4 hours after the missing person report was filed, the dead body of a young woman who was later confirmed to be Samantha Josephson was found by a group of turkey hunters in a woodland area in New Zion, about 65 miles away from 5 Points, in less than 24 hours after she was last seen on the surveillance video, getting in a black car. Dumbfounded by the gruesome discovery, the hunters straight away called 911, and representatives from the local sheriff's office were quickly dispatched to the scene. After an autopsy was performed, it was very clear that whatever happened to Samantha was a completely violent attack. Her body had more than 120 separate stab wounds, with injuries to her face, head, neck, hands, upper body, legs, and feet. It was also determined that her fingernails were hacked to pieces as she tried to shield a razor-sharp-like tool from making contact with her flesh. It seemed that she was stabbed with a double-bladed knife and then dragged to the woods. The autopsy also revealed the extent of Samantha's blood loss compared to the human body, which normally has at least 4 liters of blood to her body, which only contained 20 milliliters of blood. Investigators were able to quickly pull that surveillance video footage from the bar that night before, which revealed that Samantha got into the black Chevrolet Impala car. Investigators noticed that the car was circling the block several times, which seemed that whoever was in it was watching and waiting for a potential victim. The investigators found out that Samantha accidentally got into her killer's car, thinking it was her Uber. The Uber that Samantha called was seen arriving a short time later. However, when the driver found she was not there, he canceled the trip and left. It was likely that the car she was in was not the Uber because she was murdered only a short time later, so investigators believed that the driver probably used child-proof locks to trap her inside, because when the child-proof lock is on, the doors can only be opened from the outside of a vehicle. So at that point, Samantha would not have been able to get out. The descriptions of the car were quickly revealed to the public in the hopes of finding the perpetrator before he struck again, and fortunately, it didn't take long. After the day when Samantha's body was discovered, the black Chevrolet Impala was spotted by officers on routine patrol at 3 a.m. on March 30th, cruising the very same area Samantha was kidnapped in. When the officers pulled the car over, the driver jumped out of the car and took off running. After a short chase, he was caught a few streets over and arrested. When the police checked his identification, they discovered that the man they had in custody was a 24-year-old resident of New Zion named Nathaniel Rowland. When the patrol officers took a look inside the car, they found a child's car seat in the back, surrounded by what seemed to be bloodstains, which promptly made them call for backup after perceiving that they were looking at a presumed crime scene. When homicide detectives took over, they combed the car from top to bottom and found profuse amounts of blood on the passenger seat and in the trunk, as well as a bloody footprint on one of the back rear windows. Samantha's cell phone was also found still lying on the floorboards, which the detectives would later learn that he had attempted to sell to a pawn shop earlier that day, but he didn't like $125 for the phone offer they gave him, therefore leading him to leave it in the car. The detectives also found the child locks activated, confirming the suspicion that that was exactly how Rowland trapped Samantha in his car. Detectives also found a variety of cleaning products in the car, including bleach, window cleaner, and antibacterial wipes. But luckily he didn't do that great of a cleaning job, because there was still a lot of blood in his car. During his interrogation, Rowland continuously denied having any knowledge of the kidnapping and murder of Samantha Josephson. Even with piling evidence to the contrary, he maintained that he was innocent of the crimes of which he was being accused. When a physical examination was performed on Rowland following his arrest, it unveiled traces of Samantha's DNA under his fingernails. In a bewildering turn of events, despite that her genetic markers were present in him, none of his DNA was found on her. While that was certainly unusual, when detectives pieced together the terrifying details of her final minutes on Earth, these findings made perfect sense. From what they could collect, detectives speculated that Samantha was a victim of a blitz attack. The fact that the child-proof locks in the car were still engaged at the time of Rowland's arrest led them to conclude that he activated that feature as soon as his victim got in the car, making it impossible for her to open the doors. Without any means of defending herself, Samantha was left helpless as the man she thought was her Uber driver stabbed her repeatedly with a double-bladed knife. Caught unawares by the ferocious attack, she had to put a lot of effort into trying to keep off the blows, which would account for the multiple stab wounds found on her hands, as well as the condition of her mangled fingernails. Considering the amount of excessive force that was imposed on her, it's understandable that Samantha was not able to scratch her attacker, which would have left his skin cells under her nails. After the dreadful act was done, Rowland drove to a farmer's access road in New Zion, where only a local would have known it existed, and dumped Samantha's body in the nearby woods. After arriving back home, Rowland spent much of the day posting on social media as if nothing had happened. Since he lived there nearly all of his life, and his residence was only minutes away from where the remains were found, that was 2 more strong pieces of evidence that pointed fingers to him as the killer. A peek into his background disclosed that Rowland was a devout churchgoer who had attended South Carolina State University in 2017, although there are no records of his having graduated, and it's not clear what he was doing for employment at the time. Rowland had 1 past felony arrest from October 2018 for obtaining a signature or property under pretenses. There was also a woman who was carjacked by 2 men, one of them being Rowland, who assaulted her and forced her to drive to an ATM where they took her money. Then they forced her to drive home, where they robbed her of even more of her belongings, including a PlayStation 4. Rowland was never convicted of robbing the woman. However, he did sell some of the woman's stolen belongings, including the PlayStation 4. When detectives obtained a search warrant for his girlfriend's apartment named Maria Howard in New Zion where he lived, they combed the trash bins behind the apartment, and they found a sock and bandana allegedly belonging to Rowland that were heavily stained with Samantha's blood. The detectives also found a white sheet with blood on it, a roll of duct tape, bleach wipes with blood on them, and a 2-bladed knife that seemed to have blood on it. Tests would later confirm that the blood found on the 2-bladed knife, as well as blood found on the sheets, blood found in the car, and blood found on bleach wipes, was a match for Samantha Josephson. With the evidence against him mounting swiftly, Rowland was initially charged with possessing a weapon during a violent crime, the kidnapping and murder of Samantha Josephson. The trial would be grueling for the family, with Nathaniel Rowland pleading not guilty, claiming he was innocent even with the mountain of evidence against him. When the trial began in the summer of 2021, Rowland's defense team argued that their client was an innocent man, based largely on the fact that his DNA had not been found on his alleged victim. On the other hand, prosecutors countered the defendant's claims of innocence with the undeniable amount of evidence that was collected in the case. Amid the proof they put forward was the CCTV footage showing his car picking Samantha up in 5 points and driving away, the quarts of her blood that were found in his car, her bloody footprint on the vehicle's back window, allegations that he tried to use her bank card at an ATM after disposing of her body, cell phone trackers that placed their devices in the same place at the time of the murder, and the fact that he lived near where her remains were discovered. A handwriting expert was also brought in to compare Rowland's handwriting to a list that was written on a piece of paper found in his home. On that list it was written, "Duct tape, tape her whole body, gloves, all black, flip phone, gasoline, matches." The expert testified it was most likely that Rowland wrote the list, which sounded as if it was all planned. The prosecutors called 31 witnesses to testify, including someone who saw Rowland cleaning that weapon, the pawn shop owner to whom he tried to sell her Samantha's cell phone, and his ex-girlfriend who claimed her daughter had blood on her shoe after being in Rowland's car after the murder. Rowland called no witnesses, and none of his family testified for him. Still, he maintained his innocence and pleaded with the judge. It took the jury only an hour to deliver a guilty verdict, and Nathaniel Rowland was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In the wake of Samantha's murder, her parents Seymour and Marcy Josephson took it upon themselves to see to it that no one else suffered the same fate as their beloved daughter. As a means of achieving this goal, They started the What's My Name Foundation, which encourages people of all ages who contact rideshare agencies to ask the driver to identify them by name before setting foot inside a stranger's vehicle. The Josephsons also encouraged rideshare users to be mindful of a safety protocol they call SAMI, which stands for Stop, Ask, Match, and Inform. In the aftermath of Samantha's murder, the rideshare industry also took steps to protect drivers and passengers alike. One of the safeguards put in place was the issuance of a personalized 4-digit code that riders could use to confirm through the app that they were getting into the right car. Samantha's untimely death sent shockwaves through the hearts of her family and friends. The pain they bear is immeasurable, a testament to the bright light that Samantha was in their lives. Samantha Lee Josephson's story is a stark reminder that tragedy can strike unexpectedly. May her memory inspire us to be vigilant, look out for one another, and work collectively toward creating a world where safety and compassion prevail. On the fateful date of November 14, 1997, the vibrant life of 14-year-old Rena Verk met a heartbreaking and tragic end when a group of her peers lured her to a party. Ensnared by her peers under the guise of a party, little did she know that the festivity was a fabricated ruse concealing a sinister plot against her. As the night unfolded, her absence raised concern among her family, triggering an unsettling realization that she hadn't returned home, and no one could account for her departure from the ill-fated gathering. They reported her missing, but initially, the police did little to locate her due to her history as a runaway and her past troublesome behaviors. Tragically, her lifeless body was eventually discovered, and the dark truth behind her death would be uncovered by the investigators. This is the tragic case of Rena Verk. Rena Verk was born on March 10, 1983 in Saanich, a district municipality on Vancouver Island in British Columbia in Canada. She came from an extended family that traced its roots back to India. Rena's mother, Suman, hailed from an Indo-Canadian family, whereas her father, Manjit, was an immigrant from India. Rena's parents underwent a conversion from Hinduism and started embracing the beliefs of Jehovah's Witnesses despite being in the Saanich community, where Sikhism was prevalent among Indo-Canadians. Growing up, Rena grappled with the persistent awareness of her outsider status, yearning for acceptance from her peers. Unfortunately, she became a target of relentless bullying due to her unconventional appearance and ethnic background. In a predominantly white school, her non-mainstream looks, coupled with being overweight and having brown skin, set her apart. Adding to her challenges, Rena faced the weight of adhering to her parents' strict religious principles, a stark contrast to her peers who were beginning to explore newfound freedom from their parental control. Concerns heightened when her parents discovered the prolonged bullying she endured since she started school, and suspected that it might have taken a toll on her mental well-being and that she was slipping into depression because of it. In May 1994, the family relocated, and this led to Rena transferring from Burnside Elementary School. Her parents hoped this relocation would put an end to the persistent bullying, and initially, it seemed to be working. Rena's spirits had been lifted, and she even forged a new friendship that brought her considerable joy. However, the positive turn took a downturn when the newfound friends shunned her and distanced themselves, reigniting the cycle of bullying. In 1996, Rena graduated from elementary school and started attending Colquitt's Middle School, where she met a new set of friends she deemed as the cool kids. This group defied curfews, indulged in alcohol and smoked as well, embodying the freedom Rena yearned for, a liberation from her strict parents and their religious regulations. Despite feeling embraced by her new circle, her parents disapproved, triggering a surge in rebellious behavior. In this turbulent phase, Rena's father, Manjit, recalled imparting a scripture to his daughter saying, "Bad associations spoil useful habits." In 1996, at the age of 13, Rena received some advice from a friend suggesting a way to leave her home. The friend proposed that she could enter foster care by informing the police of alleged physical assault. Acting on this advice, Rena reported her parents for assault, but no charges were filed due to insufficient evidence. Consequently, she was temporarily removed from her family and resided with her grandparents, who believed her account. Taking a troubling turn, Rena falsely accused her father of sexual assault, causing significant trauma to him. In 1997, her father faced arrest on charges of sexually assaulting Rena, leading to his incarceration, awaiting arraignment. Ultimately, her father's charges were dismissed when she confessed to fabricating the assault allegations. Expressing discomfort in her grandparents' home, Rena was now then relocated to the foster home where she wanted to go. There, she formed connections and began mimicking her newfound friends who often smoked, always discussed gangs, where she even falsely claimed to be affiliated with one. After a while, Rena realized that living in a foster home didn't meet her expectations, as she still had responsibilities and a curfew. Therefore, she apologized to her parents and returned home. Later on, she decided to leave her parents' house again, opting to stay in a youth shelter before eventually being placed in government care. Over the following months, she found herself caught in a cycle, moving between her parents' home, foster care, and youth shelters. This tumultuous relationship with her parents, social workers, and government officials portrayed the struggles of a bewildered teenager. Desiring acceptance and friendship, she viewed her strict religious upbringing and overprotective parents as uncool or culturally out of touch, and she seemed willing to go to great lengths to gain peer approval. Middle school marked the most confusing and emotionally draining period of her life. In his 2008 book, Rena, A Father's Story, Manjeet Virk detailed the family's anguish in dealing with their daughter, expressing his belief that Rena manipulated social workers and family members alike. He lamented the lack of belief in their side of the story and the widespread acceptance of Rena's narratives. Yearning for acceptance from those who had previously rejected her, Rena eagerly sought their approval. The invitation to a party on November 14, 1997, likely stirred excitement in her as it presented an opportunity to socialize with the cool kids. The event took place during an overnight stay with her parents, initially behind a Saanich school, but later relocated to the nearby Craigflower Bridge after police intervention. Unfortunately, the party did not unfold as Rena had envisioned. At 10:40 p.m., just 20 minutes before her curfew, she reached out to her parents, notifying them that she was on her way home. Sadly, this phone call marked the last communication Rena's parents would have with her. At the Craigflower Bridge, a group of teenagers were smoking marijuana and drinking alcohol. Suddenly, several girls affiliated with a gang called the Shoreline Six targeted Rena. They subjected her to a brutal assault, physically beating her, placing a lit cigarette on her forehead, and even attempting to set her hair on fire. The attack persisted until one of the girls intervened and ordered the others to stop. Witnesses noted that the assault seemed unprovoked. After the initial attack was halted, Rena tried to escape and head home, but two teenagers, 15-year-old Kelly Ellard and 16-year-old Warren Glowatsky, pursued her. They dragged Rena to the other side of the Craigflower Bridge, where the violent onslaught continued with punches and kicks. Tragically, they held her head underwater until she succumbed to her injuries. Following her death, they removed her sweater and shoes, rolling her lifeless body into the water. Growing increasingly concerned as Rena's curfew passed by without her return, her parents initially speculated that she might have stayed at her grandparents' house for the night, but she wasn't there. She wasn't at the group home as well. They contacted one of Rena's friends, who revealed that she was still at the party when the friend left around 11 p.m. The next day, Rena's family reported her missing. However, the police response was slower due to her history as a runaway attributed to her past behavior. Rumors about a severe beating and a body found in the nearby gorge waterway circulated among the students at Colquitt's Middle School, attended by the teenagers involved. The members of the Shoreline Six group, aware of the situation, maintained a code of silence, vowing not to betray each other. Despite the prevalent rumors, an eyewitness eventually came forward to the police, stating that she had seen Kelly and Warren follow Rena after the beating. Surprisingly, a week passed before a police investigation was initiated after Rena was reported missing. Despite numerous witnesses and teachers hearing rumors about the incident, for some unknown reasons, none had reported the information to the police. Instead, it took a student coming forward as a witness to prompt police involvement. On November 21, 1997, Glowatsky and Ellard were arrested and charged with murder and aggravated assault. The members of the Shoreline Six faced aggravated assault charges, but their identities remained unknown and protected under Canada's Young Offenders Act. On November 22nd, A police helicopter flew over the Craigflower Bridge area, but no signs were observed until a ground search was conducted. The search revealed a body concealed in weeds, later identified as that of the missing teenager, Rena Verk. The forensic pathologist determined that drowning was the cause of death. Subsequent autopsy findings disclosed that Rena had sustained a significant injury, with head injuries severe enough to have been fatal even without drowning. At the time of her tragic demise, Rena was just 14 years old. In February 1998, the 6 girls involved in the initial attack on Rena were prosecuted in youth court, and as stated earlier, their identities remained shielded from the public. 3 of the girls admitted guilt to the charge of assault causing bodily harm, while the other 3 underwent a trial and were subsequently convicted of the same offense. Sentences varied, ranging from a 60-day conditional sentence to 1 year in jail. As for Ellard and Glowatsky, who were charged with Rena's murder, they faced a different legal process. Despite their ages, they were tried in adult court due to the severe nature of the crime. Warren Glowatsky had experienced a challenging upbringing marked by the absence of his alcoholic mother for a significant part of his life. Around the time of Rena's murder, he had found himself residing at a friend's house, following his father's departure from British Columbia to live in California without him. In April 1999, Glowatsky's trial commenced, and by June of the same year, he was found guilty of second-degree murder, resulting in a life sentence. As a minor at the time of the crime, he was eligible for parole after serving 7 years in prison. During his incarceration, Glowatsky discovered his Métis heritage, allowing him to involve tribal elders in his parole process. This process included various restorative justice measures involving meeting with Rena's family. In July 2006, he received unescorted temporary absences from jail and was ultimately released on full parole in June 2010. Rena's family did not oppose the parole request, as they believed Glowatsky demonstrated genuine remorse for his actions. In stark contrast, Kelly Ellard hailed from a more stable and traditional family that provided support during the trial. She was 15 years old at the time of Rena's murder. Despite her lawyer's request to have her case tried in youth court, the Supreme Court of Canada rejected this plea due to the level of violence involved in the crime and an apparent lack of remorse. Initially convicted of second-degree murder in March 2000, her conviction was overturned in January 2003 on grounds of an unfair trial. Released on bail while awaiting her appeal, Ellard had served 18 months of her life sentence. However, during this period of release pending a new trial, she faced charges of assault causing bodily harm for beating a 58-year-old woman in a Vancouver park. Her bail was revoked, and she was returned to prison by March 2004. In June 2004, Kelly Ellard faced a new trial. Witnesses testified that she had bragged about being responsible for Rena's death. Glowatsky asserted that he had witnessed Ellard drowning Rena, but Ellard's lawyer questioned Glowatsky's credibility, highlighting alleged inconsistencies in his initial statements to the police and during the trial. Throughout her trial, Ellard admitted to assaulting Rena, claiming it was in defense of her friends as she thought that she was going to hurt them. However, she vehemently denied committing murder. She shifted blame, asserting that Glowatsky and 2 other girls were the ones responsible for Rena's death. She expressed a resigned acceptance of an impending conviction, stating, "I'm obviously going to be convicted. You've got what you want. My life is ruined." Ellard showed no remorse for her actions and failed to disclose the motive behind the planned attack. After deliberating for 5 days, the jury reached an impasse, leading to a mistrial declared by the judge in July 2004 due to a deadlock among the jurors. In February 2005, Kelly Ellard faced a new trial, with Glowatsky once again serving as the key witness. Glowatsky reiterated his testimony, affirming that he and Ellard had assaulted Rena, leaving her lifeless in the water. On April 12, 2005, Ellard was convicted for the second time of second-degree murder and received a life sentence with no chance of parole for 7 years. However, in September 2008, the British Columbia Court of Appeal overturned Ellard's second-degree murder conviction, ordering a 4th trial on the grounds that the judge in her 3rd trial had provided incorrect instructions to the jury regarding the testimony presented in the case. This legal saga finally concluded in June 2009 when the Supreme Court of Canada upheld her conviction for second-degree murder, putting an end to the prolonged legal proceedings. In 2017, Ellard was granted day parole. and by 2019, she received additional privileges such as overnight leaves and extended day parole. The Parole Board of Canada approved the continuation of Ellard's day parole. This decision drew significant media attention on July 14, 2020, as Ellard, who had initially received a life sentence, was now serving time on day parole. During her time on parole, Ellard changed her name to Kerry Sim, started a family with her spouse, with the couple getting 2 children, and adhered to the conditions of her parole, including abstaining from alcohol and drugs and maintaining no contact with Rena's family. The lingering question all this time, however, revolved around the motive behind the teenagers deciding to beat up Rena and end up murdering her. One supposed reason was revenge. Rena had previously lived in a group home with 2 of the girls involved in the assault, who accused her of stealing her phone book and making calls while spreading rumors. Another girl claimed she harbored resentment towards Rena for allegedly stealing her boyfriend. In the year 2000, when Rena's parents initiated legal action against the teenagers involved, as well as the British Columbia government and other parties, Rena's father stated, "Society doesn't make people take responsibility for their actions. This is one way to make them responsible." In 2012, Rena's mother addressed her daughter's tragic death and the detrimental impact of bullying on young individuals. She shared, "For so long, we were consumed with the legalities of dealing with our murdered child, the courts prolonging the cases, and it's kind of like you put your feelings and your grief on hold. And I'm finding that now I'm feeling more of the impact of losing Rena, the emotions and feelings. So actually, I'm struggling more now and missing her more. I'm sad to say that the severity and the frequency of bullying are increasing instead of decreasing. And also, I think we're all shocked by the means that young people are using to bully their peers, with cyberbullying and texting, all these things that were not there when Rena was killed." The tragic murder of Rena sparked a nationwide conversation on racism and bullying, particularly committed by young girls to other young girls they didn't like. In the aftermath of their daughter's death, Rena's parents sought to channel something positive from the tragedy. They initiated various anti-bullying campaigns and inclusion programs and actively advocated for the implementation of anti-bullying measures in British Columbia schools. Their outreach extended to speaking about bullying to students, teachers, and law enforcement professionals. Through their persistent efforts, the government of British Columbia introduced an anti-bullying program in schools across the province. In recognition of their impactful advocacy, Rena's parents received a prestigious accolade in 2009. They were honored with the Anthony J. Hume Award of Distinction in British Columbia for their dedication to crime prevention and community safety efforts. It is sad and unfortunate what Rena Verk faced throughout her life up until her final moments. And while her actions were troublesome, it is somewhat understandable given the common teenage desire to try to fit in, which can have both positive and negative consequences. Despite the challenges, her family continued to love her, even in the aftermath of false accusations and heinous deeds attributed to them. Their love for her remained unwavering, as they always wanted the best for her. Our deepest sympathies go out to the life that was lost too soon and the grieving loved ones she left behind.